This is a very small part of an essay called 5 Offerings of Gratitude by Allison Hawthorne Deming. She writes, "Whenever I fly back home to Tucson, I am stunned by the view over the jet's wing. Desiccated terrain spans out, brown and stark. Pathways and deltas where water once flowed look like scars running down slopes. Brown land, nothing green in sight. It is a landscape that might make one ask, do we belong here? What must we do to be at home in such barren terrain? But of course, for at least 10,000 years, people have belonged to this desert place. They have tended it and abused it, made it flower and let it lie fallow, used its very dirt to build pots and ovens and homes and garden walls. People have matched the desert's inventiveness and skill at surviving extremity. By the time the jet lands, saguaros, cholas, and ocotillos have raised up their hands in greeting. Life in all its entanglements is abundant in the desert, an abundance hard-earned in time-crafted adaptations. One of my new favorite dishes is roasted broccoli and onions. It's a straightforward dish I discovered while in Portland for a few weeks in preparation for our last General Assembly. It's relatively easy to prepare, I turned out, needing just Himalayan salt, pepper, olive oil, and a hot oven at about 450 degrees. And when I cook it correctly, it comes out perfectly. The onions caramelized, the broccoli soft and slightly sweet. I adore the smell of onions cooking in oil or butter, turning a soft brown as they caramelize, some magical alchemy that makes onions sweet on my tongue. Mi esposa, my wife, Nancy, can depend on me popping into the kitchen when she is browning onions, and of course, getting in her way. Of course, onions can bring a bit of misery, can't they, when we are preparing them. When we cut into a juicy onion, microscopic droplets float into the air. Slicing through an onion damages the cells, causing enzymes and other substances that are normally kept apart to spill out and react with one another. The result is a sulfur-containing chemical that I will not try to pronounce, but it resembles tear gas. Yeah, when this chemical meets the water in our eyes, it forms an irritating acid. And I, perhaps like you, have chopped up an onion with my eyes streaming, tears running down my cheeks and puddling in the corners of my mouth. Those tears caused by an onion are made from our body's salt and water. They serve the purpose of flushing an irritant out of our eyes, in this case, sulfur. They are different from the tears we cry when we are emotional, sad, upset, angry, joyful, ecstatic, for example. Tears we cry when we are emotional have an additional ingredient, a protein. Scientists think that when this protein is present, it marks tears as helping to flush out the body's response to strong emotions. Our Unitarian Universalist theologies rest upon the principle that this human reality is an interconnected web of life. We are intertwined with onions. We are intertwined with a saguaro, an ocotillo, and the gila woodpecker that roosts in a saguaro, carving out a hole. It is not a web in which we can extract ourselves. We are indubitably, inextricably bound in sickness and in health, in joy and in sorrow. We must pluck the onion from its underground home, and when we chop it, we are cutting through cells. That might make you tear. Amy mentioned the elections, and you may have had moments of tearing up during this seemingly long election season. Those tears may have come from frustration, anger, deep despondency, fear. You may have felt like your very life and the life of your family and your friends have been under attack. How do we move through something like the election season, wearing our hopes and our dreams for our lives on our sleeves when we face a headwind of indifference stoked by an active wish in some that we've been denied the right to vote? How do we participate on Election Day knowing that a politician wishes to control our state but is not interested in representing our desires, and that they represent people with money whose orientation is towards self-interest and perhaps do not even live in our neighborhoods? How do we carry on when they refuse to give us a courtesy of listening to our hopes and aspirations of our own lives? These were the questions that seized me in these past months. Our election process in places has become uncivil. I tried not to listen or to watch the political ads or look at every road sign because so many were mean-spirited or perpetuated lies, not backed by reason or science. You might remember a time when standing in line to vote might have meant exchanging pleasantries with the people around you. Now, one is not sure how the conversation will go. Over our lifetime, our signatures change ever so slightly year over year until they can look quite different from our 20s to our 80s. But typically, a span of 2 years ought not make a difference. But as I signed my ballot envelope, I worried that someone may decide that my signature did not exactly match the one on file, and my ballot would be discounted. What a terrible thought to have. What a terrible place to be in, worried that you will be sliced out of the democratic process, sliced out of having a say, sliced out of anyone listening to you, even on a piece of paper called a ballot. Intimidation by voters at early voting stations and at drop-off boxes was met with court challenges. Hypervigilance was necessary in our state and helped stem attempts to keep voters from participating. Whew. And yet there was something that I did. On Tuesday, I was a poll monitor, part of a 2-person de-escalation safety team, long name, in Maricopa County. We were a nonpartisan team there strictly for the voters, to help them if necessary, to be a calming presence, to intervene if tension flared, to listen if something was amiss, and to report it to a national organization monitoring elections across the United States. I never thought that I would be doing this here in my country. I have been a poll monitor in places like Haiti, in places like Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Serbia for the United Nations. You could not have told me that I would need to do that in my own country. As you've probably heard or read, there were problems right here in our own county, some of which I and my partner reported Ballot machines failed in 2 of the 17 voting sites that we were monitoring. Voters stood in line, filled out their ballots, only to have machines reject them. Not all ballots, but indiscriminately, with no pattern. So no voter knew whether they were standing in line, and it would be a waste. People were upset, but we were there to witness it and to report it. Eventually, many such reports resulted in a statement from the Secretary of Elections that told voters what to do if they found themselves in such a situation. Nonetheless, despite the difficulties, poll monitors across the greater Phoenix area and in several states such as Georgia and Pennsylvania passed out water and joy and engaged those bent on intimidation and passed out the truth to counter rumors. Despite sour attempts to counter unhindered participation, voters prevailed. Many of us have felt uncomfortable during this election season. We are holding our breath as we wait the full election results. We know crying from an onion is not the same as expressing emotions through crying. Stress and anxiety and trauma write themselves on our bodies, and you may still be holding some of this season. So I want to offer a gift to our bodies this morning. As you are willing and able, please stretch your arms above your head. Clench and unclench your hands. Imagine the stress and the anxiety flowing out of your palms up and being changed by Mother Earth and Father Sky. Be sure not to bump into your neighbor. I think we're doing well. Stretch your arms and your legs, clench and unclench your toes. Oh, doesn't that feel good? Breathe, open your chest and take in the air, oxygen. Acknowledge as you do this your sadness and your grief, your fear, if you are a person of color, particularly your despair, your disappointment, your inability to control the outcome of Tuesday. Shake your hands down. Acknowledging our shock and sadness can help us move through. I invite you now to turn to any joy, any sweetness you can draw from the results so far. Or perhaps it was that you voted with ease. Maybe it's for the joy of our young generation who turned up and showed up. Yes, yes. I watched a poll worker take a picture of 3 friends who were voting for the first time, and they were just thrilled to be there and were fierce in their desire to cast their ballot. Glimmers of joy, glimmers of hope that those who want to keep us from voting, to control who gets to vote, seem to have been turned away. As wise ancestors teach us, the path of spiritual growth and religious maturity means we grapple with who and what is pleasurable and who and what is less so. It appears to be a condition of life. In the interconnected web of life, we do not get to choose what life is included and who and what is not, the sweet and the sour. While I do not believe that suffering is necessary, I do believe that I am not enlightened enough to avoid it. And that, like choosing to chop an onion, sometimes I am choosing a condition that brings me discomfort. And whether you prefer sour over sweet or sweet over sour, together they remind us to be aware of the fullness of life. I leave you with one more short vignette, this from my childhood. My grandparents owned 40 acres in Upper Michigan, and yes, that was a nod to 40 acres and a mule. It was native forest that backed right up onto federal land. It was rich with animal life. It was wild, and for a child, whew, frogs and toads and a bear, yes. Bats, all sorts of wonderful life. And my grandparents managed to carve out about an acre for a cabin and for a little garden. My grandmother had a green thumb. My family and I spent many happy weeks during summer vacation at that cabin. A particular memory still brings me joy, and that is my amazement at the first taste of onions grown by my grandmother in that small garden. One day we went out and we dug them up. She cooked them that day with green beans that were also freshly picked. Sauteing them all together, I can still remember the smell and that taste. I think it was perhaps one of the most delicious things I've ever eaten because it is still so real to me. It was an experience I will always remember, even as an adult, as I cry my way through chopping another onion. Namaste.